So welcome everyone to this episode of Stories for Healing. We are moving forward now into our third calendar month of this. Um, our effort to share stories of healing and reconciliation, transformation, growth, to try and shepherd us through these difficult times of division and antipathy, of stress. It's what we storytellers kind of not only know how to do, but are compelled to do. Um, and so today I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Martin Manasse here to tell us a story of such a sort. So Martin, please tell us a story.
There was a king. He loved his people, and his people loved him, and they trusted him, because at regular intervals he would turn up on the palace steps, and he would tell them how it was in the kingdom, whether it was good, whether it was bad. He never told them lies, he never deceived them, he let them know how it was, and he was greatly respected and loved. And one day he was prepared for this appearance on the steps, and he went to his washstand and looked in the bowl of water and saw his face reflected. "Oh, my goodness," he said, "I must do something about this." Now the king had a trumpeter, and the trumpeter would come out onto the steps and blow, bop, 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 and then everyone would shout, "Silence for the king!" And then he would speak. And on this occasion, out comes the trumpeter, blows the fanfare, "Silence for the king!" "My dear friends," said the king, "I have just realized that I'm an old man. I have no queen, I have no prince, I have no princess. So the succession, I think, will have to come from one of you good people. One of you will be king or queen after me. Will you please come back in 3 days' time? I will tell you how we do this." Well, the excitement was great. There was a lot of murmuring and discussion. "I could be king, you could be king. Oh, this is so exciting." 3 days later, they were back. I mean, the palace yard was packed. And the trumpeter comes out, blows the fanfare, everyone shouts, "Silence for the king," and he appears. And in his hand is a bowl. And he said, "I've asked you to come back because we want to choose the new king or queen. I'll tell you how we do it. In this bowl, I have seeds. And each one of you who would like to be king or queen after me will take a seed. And when you take that seed, you are making me a promise that you will bring that same seed back to me in 6 months' time and show me how it is grown. And then I will know who the next king or queen should be." Well, there was a lot of muttering and grumbling and growling, particularly because so many of the people were dressed up. Some people had dressed up in armor to show they would be good warrior kings. Other people had brought music or paintings to show they'd be great artistic kings. And others had brought books to show they'd be great philosophical kings. And here they were talking about seeds. But on the other hand, they did want to be. So they queued up, and many, many people took seeds. And right at the end of the queue came a girl. And the king said, "You're taking a seed?" "Oh, yes. My father's a farmer. He says I can grow things better than he does. I'm longing to see how your seed grows. I will take one." And then she ran. She ran through the crowd. She ran down the street. She ran with hair flying, skirts flying. She landed, Mum, Dad, I've got the king's seed. I'm going to grow the king's seed." And she rushed to the barn. She found a pot. She put some compost in the pot. She put the seed in the compost. She made sure it was the right temperature, the right moisture, and she watched that seed. Now, if you've ever grown a seed, you know that the first thing that happens, you get this tiny little shoot that comes up and splits into two anonymous little leaves, and the actual nature of the plant comes later. And she watched for that, and she watched. She watched for a week. She watched for 2 weeks. She watched for 3 weeks. She watched for a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and then it was 6 months. And her father said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to take it back, of course," she said. "I promised." And so she set off for the palace. She wore her best dress and a cardigan because she was just slightly self-conscious about the pot not having any plant in it. And as she got to the palace, she found that was justified, because the closer she got to the palace, the more people she met, and they all had pots. They had amazing pots, plants, flowers, small trees, even vegetables. It was amazing getting close to the palace. The crowd got bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally, the palace itself, the yard, looked like a horticultural show. And the trumpeter blew his trumpet, and the king appeared and said, "Well, line up and show me what you've brought." And everyone went past, the king sort of nodding and smiling as they went past. And this farmer's daughter was so embarrassed. She had the pot half hidden under her cardigan, and she came past the last, and she hurried actually to get past quickly, and a hand touched her shoulder, and she looked up, and the king had come down the stairs. "Excuse me, I don't see what's in your pot." Her face was scarlet with embarrassment. "There's nothing. I tried to grow your seed. I'm really good at growing seeds. I can do it really well, but it wouldn't grow. Nothing happened at all. I'm sorry, but I did my best." And to her astonishment, the king had a massive smile on his face and said to the trumpeter, "Tell everybody else to go home. Come with me," he said. And they went into the palace and sat down at a table. "I asked everybody," said the king, "to come back in 3 days so that I could tell them how we would choose. In those 3 days, I took my seeds. I put them in a saucepan. I covered them with salt and then with water, and I boiled them and boiled them and boiled them and boiled them. Those seeds were totally sterile, because I wanted to know who was honest enough and courageous enough to bring me back the same seed that I gave to them. And you did that, so you can be the new queen." And she was terrified. "But I don't know anything about being a queen. I don't know." "I'm not dead yet," he said. "Come to the palace, and we will work together, and I will teach you what I can." And when the old king died, the farmer's daughter became a queen, and she was a very good queen indeed. Thank you.
Oh, what a delicious story. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. How did you first come across that story?
I will tell you in a moment, because, in fact, the curious thing about that story is that the temptation is to say, well, that I'm not like present-day rulers. And I avoid that, because I leave it to people to make their own. I met a storyteller called Pamela Marr, who is a Jewish lady from Cricklewood in London. I think she's a broadcaster. I haven't seen her for years and years and years, but she had a huge influence on me, because I thought she was utterly wonderful. And it was announced that she would be part of a weekend in the country, and she would do a session on personal story, not, I think, as many tellers do it now, but on meaning finding your own story within yourself.
Right.
And I went down to sit at her feet, and I already had a story from her that I'd stolen from her. Anyway, we arrived, and the organizer had a student storyteller there who told us a story, and it was that story. And that's how I first heard it. And I immediately went to her and said, "I like that story. Are you happy for me to retell it?" And, "Oh, yes," she said, "it's a public story." In fact, I think she personally has now made it into a book, but I would hate that, because anyway, because once it's in a book, it's stuck. It can't get any further. But anyway, so I told this story for years and years and years and years. And then suddenly, about a year ago, I said to myself, hang on, why has it got to be a farmer's boy? Why can't it be a farmer's daughter?
Great.
And I changed the sex.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that makes the story so much more interesting and so much more powerful.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing. You know the story about the giant fear?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
At the end of the valley, when and the king dies, and his 14-year-old son has to, and eventually the army's fled away, and the elite guards have fled, and he walks down the valley, and it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. I turned him into a girl too, and I just love the way that this transforms stories and makes them much more, in my view, much less parochial, much less patriarchal, and much more
Yeah.
universal. So,
Well, and I also, for me, um, the a young girl is kind of the story symbol, metaphor, whatever, for a soul. And that's our souls are like little feminine innocent things that's kind of captured in the notion of a young girl. And so as I think about this in those terms, and how is it that we nurture ourselves as our souls, um, well, we do it by being honest and by being open to learning from others and all those things, all the wonderful values in that story. That even speaks to me, and again, deep, a little more deeply than the surface because of that. So thank you. Let me thank you all for coming to yet another edition of Stories for Healing. I want to remind you that it's available uh, on both on the Facebook page that you've watched this, if you're watching it live, the Transformational Story page, or on the YouTube playlist. You can find these all these stories collected there um, since we started, and I encourage you to speak to each other, not just to tell stories, but speak as with the open heartedness of both the king and the little farmer's girl, and discover what can happen when we treat each other with such respect and honesty. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.